Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back to the show. How are you guys doing? Hope that you guys are all doing okay and that you're staying safe from all of the things and challenges that are going on out in the world today. And hopefully you are, just enjoying life as it comes, getting out into the sunshine, enjoying all of the beautiful elements that Earth has to offer. And I'm excited to be back here and talking with you today. I have another great show planned for you guys today, as always. And of course, you know how we like to do it here, get the administrative stuff out of the way first, so that you guys can be in the know about everything that's happening. Of course, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or you'd like to email me about the show, please email me at adatewithdarkness@gmail.com. And if you are interested in being on the email list to find out things about narcissistic abuse and other great information that I send out every Friday morning, go on over to my website, drnataliejones.com. It's right there on the homepage where you can download the free ebook, which is helping you to go down a checklist if you have red flags in your relationships. Love to have you on that. And as always, you know that you can join the free Facebook group, join like-minded people who are currently healing from relationships that have been hurtful. And so if you want to join that group or offer support to that group, again, A Date with Darkness on Facebook. And again, the online individual and group membership coaching is coming available. You can click that link down on the show notes and view the landing page, as well as we will be sending out a newsletter shortly so that you guys can take a sneak peek on the new website there. All right. Again, so I have a great show coming up for you. I have a very special guest. And we're going to talk on the show today about microaggression and why microaggression, because I think narcissistic abuse can expand to things beyond the traditional romantic or the parental relationship, and where people are oppressed, people are exploited, people are dehumanized. And I think microaggression is an excellent topic to discuss as it relates to that, because I think a lot of the elements that we see in what we see in the intimate partner and the parental relationships is often demonstrated here on a systemic level here as well. You have the overt and the covert forms of abuse here as well. And so today I thought we'd have a very thoughtful discussion about that. My guest today is Dr. Holly, and she and I really get into it about microaggression and how problematic coping patterns evolve as a result of oppression and abuse that marginalize people, specifically as we talk about here, Black folks experience. So without further ado, here's Dr. Holly. Hello and welcome to the show, Dr. Holly.
Hi, thanks for having me, Dr. Jones.
I'm super excited and stoked about this show. You know, for my listeners, or for the listeners who don't know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and the passion behind your work?
I am Dr. Holly Sawyer, preferred name Dr. Holly. I am a licensed therapist in Philadelphia. I specialize in addictions, and I have worked in various levels of cares. When I work in community health, been a clinical director several times.
Mm,
Um, I have a solo practice, Black First Therapy, where I work specifically with Black professional women who experience microaggressions in the workplace. I launched a 100% online group practice at the when the pandemic 2020 in July. That has been going very great. We focused on persons 14 and over who are Black, Native American, and Hispanic, just to have
mhm,
representation for those persons. Um,
mhm.
I'm also a college professor, an author, a national mental health speaker. And as of recent, I have become a stand up comedian.
That's so interesting. So where can we catch your stand up?
So, I'm not Netflix famous yet, but I do a lot of open mics. So,
Love it.
just this past weekend, I did an open mic down in Baltimore. I did a show in DC last Sunday. So
Mm.
that was like really exhilarating. So, I do stuff locally in here in Philly, but as I travel throughout the country, I just find, an open mic night and I just go for it.
Okay, so maybe we can have a little something at the end? Maybe?
Oh.
If
I didn't
not, I
prepare.
totally get it. I totally get it. We weren't prepared for that, but yeah, that's pretty awesome. So tell me more about the passion behind the folks that you serve in your practice, because that's very specific in terms of microaggression and, things like that.
Yes. So, growing, I guess, in my career, in my, early, late 20s, I just experienced so many microaggressions, no matter what space I was in. A lot of them were predominantly white. When I started going to therapy, when I was living in DC, my therapist was white. So there was microaggressions there with her assumptions. And it just always shocked me, like whether I was in a workplace or in therapy, like how many other Black women are experiencing this and not really knowing
Right.
what it is, what it means,
Yeah.
how detrimental it is to us emotionally and mentally.
Mhm.
And when I, went back to school to get this master's and decided like, okay, I'm gonna niche and I know what I'm gonna focus on because I could imagine how isolating that feels. And people may think or that you're making stuff up or that it's all in your head, not having the support of HR. And I was just like, I would want to be a support for Black women in that space. So that's really how that niche was really born.
Okay. So, can you break down for people that might not know what a microaggression is?
Okay, so a microaggression is basically it could be a verbal, assault or insult on you as a Black female. And so when I teach the workshop on microaggressions, we talk about micro and macro.
Mm,
And micro aggressions are basically institutionalized systematic racism. But a microaggression is something that's kind of like an isolated event that can happen at a grocery store. It can happen in your workplace. It can happen in the therapy room. And so usually microaggressions come in the form of a lot of times verbally where someone is attacking maybe your vernacular. You speak very well for a Black woman, right?
mm,
Or it could be a form of, can I touch your hair? I didn't know that, you can wear it, straight like this. And then you wear it this way another day. I remember working in community health and I had a white coworker and I wore my hair out in the afro and they had never seen that. So, right, we're talking about what Black women in professional settings wearing their professional hair, right? We know our hair is very different from our white
yeah.
coworkers. And so one day I wore an afro, and my coworker, who was literally sitting on the opposite side of this training we all were in, went back to my supervisor, who's Black, and said, "Oh my gosh, I cannot believe how big her hair was. It was so distracting the whole time. I couldn't even see the presenter or the presentation.
Mm,
Now, we were nowhere near sitting near each other at
mm,
all. And so she
mm.
laughed about it. And my supervisor, who was Black at the time, was offended, but she wasn't offended enough to advocate for me. But she did tell me and was like, didn't want me to say anything because she was scared. And I was like, no, you didn't advocate for me. So I'm definitely going to say something and I'm going to talk to your supervisor. So when we talk about our hair, the way that, again, how we are articulate, educated, those aggressions can come from any, space, but they're usually spouted out by persons who are, non-Black, mostly white folks. You may get it from someone who's Asian or from another ethnicity or culture, but my experience has always been with coworkers and peers or classmates who are white.
Why is microaggression a thing? Because I'm sure there's going to be someone who listens to this, right? That might be a non-person of color, a non-Black person. Why is this an issue? Why are you making something out of nothing, people would say?
Well, anytime you assault and offend somebody, it's not nothing, right? Sometimes people don't know that they are being insulting. Sometimes people do know and they're saying something out of fear, right?
Yes,
Or they feel threatened just by your presence alone,
absolutely.
right? And
Absolutely.
so when I feel threatened and by your presence alone, your education, your experience, your background, how you carry yourself, how you flow through with your Black boy or girl magic, then I am triggered. So 9 times out of 10, as a reflection of that, I'm going to spout out a microaggression comment.
Absolutely. And I would even take it a step further. I would say that, and I don't know what your thoughts are about this, but I would say that it's almost like there's an aspect of dehumanization to it,
Mhm. It
where you're
is.
not being seen. You're not being seen on the same level as a human being,
Mhm.
right? And although we're talking about some of the stuff that's overt, there's a lot more covert that kind of goes with it. I mean, these are people that are very comfortable making these statements, but what goes on underneath when people have these thoughts, and these thoughts then turn into denied opportunities,
Sure. Sure.
denied growth potential, denied,
Mhm.
just harsher uh harsher, grades, penalties, harsher sentencing, just on a systemic level. So although,
Exactly.
yeah, we're talking about, I think it's a much bigger issue that people negate to see. Yeah, people are saying those things because they're comfortable, right? They're comfortable. In dehumanization of someone feels comfortable enough to say it, but I think also underneath is a much bigger issue.
It is. And it's, a lot of times people only think that it refers to systemic things or institutions, but
Mhm.
I've had students that have experienced it, right?
Mhm.
With their white professors.
Yep.
So it's not just the workplace, it shows up in the classrooms, whether you're undergraduate or graduate. Student, because you may have white professors that don't understand how you were able to attend a PWI, predominantly white institution. How are
Yes.
you were able to get in here? What did you do,
Mm.
to get in?
Mhm.
And so there are times where people may think that you were not smart enough to come up with certain ideas or be creative, or you may share an idea, but it's not accepted. It's not looked at as, an excellent idea until your white peer or coworker says
Yes.
the same exact thing and then they're given credit. I've seen it where two coworkers, Black and white,
Yes.
going out on maternity leave. One was highly questioned, when are you coming back? Can I reach you? And XYZ, where
Yes.
the white, coworker was not under that much scrutiny, taking mental health days, again, just being held under this microscope. constantly, because again, I think there's just a level of not only fragility, but just feeling threatened for really no real reason.
Yes, I so agree with you. You know, the one question that came into my mind, and I'd love to hear what you have to say on this, is what impact do you think that it has amongst Black folks amongst each other who experience that? Like, how is this internalized and how does this impact how we socialize with each other? If that
You know
makes
that
sense.
No, it does, but I think it varies. I can only speak from my experience in that
Yeah.
depending on the workspace, and I'll give you two scenarios. I've worked in a majority white space, and maybe it was one, including me, two Black people there that were not the cleaning staff, but actually professionals. And they were not supportive of when I would advocate for myself, even though they were going through the same thing. In their mind, it was like, how dare you speak up? You just come to work, do your job, and go home.
Every
And
man
I,
for himself, kind of like.
yeah, and I'm like, I'm not that type of person, because the next Black person, if they do decide to hire, they're going to go through the same thing. So why are you not advocating and saying something for us in this space?
Mhm, mhm.
However, I have worked on the other side of that, where Black persons are supportive because they know that this is the kind of culture
Yes.
that's going on. So even if we can't change it internally, what we can do is support each other in how we navigate this space. Um, do we advocate? Yes, we try to make changes, but again, we can only do so much, right?
Mhm,
But again, the support is there. So I've seen both sides.
mhm. I share those sentiments and where I've seen both sides where it's, almost like that crabs in a bucket mentality, every man for himself. I don't want to be
Yeah.
associated with you. Um, I've even had it, in this, I know this might not be politically correct, but I've even experienced it where other people are almost like in denial of their Blackness.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
they don't associate at all with that or with those people, as it's been put, you
Hmm.
know? And yeah, I've had people that are very cohesive and very supportive. I've experienced people that have been cohesive and supportive until or unless they've gotten promoted. And then,
Oh, yeah. I've seen that too, where that now that I'm promoted, I don't even, identify that. Yeah, it is a thing. But I'm
Mhm.
not a part of that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've seen that too. Yeah, it's weird how it can play out amongst the dynamics within our own people, right?
yeah,
Um, but either way, I've just never stopped advocating, because it can wear and tear, and
yeah,
not just the clients who I work with is proof of that, but me going through it and still going through it in some spaces, right?
yes,
It just never stops because
yeah.
racism is still alive and well, right?
Mhm.
So it's interesting how people either just turn a blind eye, and I'm talking about Black folk, turn a blind eye, or just learn how to navigate it and kind of numb themselves,
Yeah.
right? Because it's so much, or they do advocate, but even that becomes very stressful and tiring.
Mm. The thought I had is, people that experience this more than likely carry it home. Take it
Yes,
home.
yes.
Can you talk about maybe how some of those things may show up in their home life or some of those internal struggles may show up in their home life?
Sure. So one thing that I work with my clients on is not turning to substances, drugs, or behavioral types of addictions to cope,
Mm.
right? So if you're a person who likes to come home to a glass of wine, that's fine, no problem, right? But I do have clients where they've been in the trenches of just constantly being bombarded with microaggressions, that a glass has now turned to a couple of bottles, not one, but a couple, right? Or they may start to shop more than usual to help them cope. Promiscuous sex, gambling, believe it or not. And so that shows up in their home life because now it impacts their finances, right? Their productivity with maybe being a parent or just showing up to do normal functioning things
Mm.
that's not necessarily connected to their job, that now they are not able to do on the level to which they normally would do. Um, having, sporadic or constant arguments with a loved one or a spouse, right? Because now it seems like you're the target for everyone. So if someone wants just a generally actual question, now you're just on edge because you're always having to be on edge and defend yourself in the workplace. So when you bring it home, you're bringing that with you. So that shows up. Low libido, not really interested in having sex, right? And wanting intimacy. I've seen or experienced with working with my clients where um, they are isolating and just like shutting off and not really being present for anything besides work. And sometimes that isn't even really present. You have a body there, but they've kind of just like checked out and detached.
Mhm.
We're talking insomnia because they're worried about what the next day is going to bring because of what
Mhm.
happened the previous day, or late night emails that's very attacking. So I can't really sleep because this thing has been so jarring to me, right?
Yeah.
But it just comes home and shows up in various ways.
Right. And one of the other things I also wondered about, and I don't know if you've experienced this because I remember for myself when I was kind of in a place that was very, very aggressive, it was paranoia. It was like
Mhm.
this paranoia, it's like this dread of going to work and this constant paranoia that, I'm going to be fired or I'm going to be reprimanded or there's going to be some sort of consequence and just feeling extra stressed about that and almost like maybe it's a form of depression, if you will.
Yes. Hmm.
I'm curious to know from your perspective because, there's a lot of people who use substances, but they're not quite clear of when it becomes an issue. How do you know going home to unwind and have a glass of wine or having some tequila or, you know, doing something recreational is unwinding versus when it becomes a problem or an addiction?
Okay. So between dependency and addiction, we're looking at someone, like you said, who has now taken a couple shots of tequila, but now it becomes a habitual thing. So
Mhm.
where I may come home and have a shot or two at night, but now I'm drinking a whole bottle at night, right? Or
Mhm.
throughout the entire week because I need this to take the edge off
Mm.
from what type of day I just had throughout the day. So that turns into oversleeping, not making it to work on time, right? And when I come home, I go back to this same routine. Now I'm missing 2 or 3 days of work, whether they're consecutively or gaps in between.
Mhm.
Now that has happened, my habit has turned into me spending more money on tequila now, and maybe I'm late on paying utility bill, or I don't have as much money that I would usually have
Mhm.
because now I'm spending it on wine, tequila, making sure I have a stock full bar. So when we look at dependency and addiction, we're looking at someone whose daily lives and functions are now highly impacted by their drinking and or using substances or
Mhm.
gambling, right? And so this could mean that they're no longer able to provide food, clothes, and shelter for themselves because they have to have that whatever it is that they're addicted to. That
Mhm.
thing comes first. I'm not able to function unless I wake up and have this drink, unless I wake up and go play, 2 hours of online casino. Um, and then once I do some level of productivity, I come back, but I still end my night with the drinking, with the gambling, right? So it's a continuum of me starting out with maybe just a shot, and then it just totally progresses. And as it progresses, it
Mhm.
impacts the way I function on a daily basis and how um, it may play a role into how I take care of myself. Again, providing those basic necessities of food, clothes, and shelter.
And I would also say how you show up socially too, right?
Yeah.
Because I think if you have to go home, when you go home and you have to have a drink or you have to do something every day in order to just deal with life, I think that's right there is an issue. And I think that's an addiction. But also, too, just if you show up with people and you have to have a drink you have to do it, or you can't socialize, or you can't maintain those interactions without having a drink. It's challenging, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, it is challenging. I think, if some people go to happy hour to unwind. And then if I'm coming from work where I just had like a very stressful day where I had to deal with so much racism and microaggressions throughout my day, that may be a higher level of stress than someone who may be behind on a project, who came into work late, just things like that. That's a different type of level of stress than someone who is constantly being bombarded with racism and microaggression. So when I show up to happy hour, I may be drinking more than normal. And my friends could be looking at me like, hey, what's going on? But I don't want to talk about it because I'll be triggered. So let me find my peace within these shots,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And just really not, like you said, show up in a very healthy
Yeah,
social
yeah.
space.
Well, they could be egging you on too, I think, because I remember, when I worked in corrections, drinking is very normalized.
Mm-hmm.
And that's almost like a group activity sometimes after work. And I'm not saying that all correctional people do that, but I do know, like, with certain job, the culture is, let's it's been a crappy day. Let's all go out and get hammered before we
Yeah.
go home.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right. Lawyers, judges, right? We can
Yeah.
name a couple professions where it's just been one of those weeks or days, and this is what we do. So you're right. But again, like you said, there does become a point where it's no longer like that, the kind of normalizing type drink.
When we do this, when we kind of cope with these problematic behaviors, well, first of all, let's back it up here. If there's somebody that's listening to you right now, right? And they might be saying, well, yeah, Dr. Ollie, I like to drink. I like to have a good time. And yeah, I have a stressful job, but I don't have a problem. How can is there something you could say that they should consider before being very dismissive that they might have a problem?
So when you work with persons who are in drug and alcohol treatment, they have to come to the realization that it's a problem, whether it's the dependency or full on addiction.
Hmm.
So I personally don't say to someone like which one it is, because they
Okay,
have to come to that realization.
sure.
And once they come to that realization, then as a therapist, I can work with you, because someone who's in denial, I can't really help if you don't really see or can admit that it's a problem, right? So then there's that piece. But if you have someone who is noticing
Hmm.
that their normal way of coping has turned now into a dependency or an addiction, then what we usually do is I just refer them to an outpatient unless they need a higher level of care, which could be detox or rehab,
Hmm.
right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Usually, with my clients, they have not gotten to that level of dependency or addiction, because what it happens is they're realizing that they're changing, not necessarily just in their consumption, but just who they are as a person overall. They're
Hmm.
not liking what this is turning them into. And so the main thing we look at is like, okay, well, what are some ways that you are coping? And what do you want from this experience, so we can work towards that? Because a lot of times people will say, well, I don't want to leave, I've put in 30 years at this company. And so we'll say, okay, I get it, pension, 30 years, you don't want to leave, but what do you want? Because they're not going to stop, but you have to advocate for yourself and be in charge of what it is that
Hmm.
you want. Then there are some people that say, listen, I want to go to court. Here's all the documentation. I want to go for litigations. I've been called to be an expert witness in court cases with some of my clients. So my clients will say, listen, I don't want to no longer be in this department and or job, but I would like to apply in another department or just leave altogether. But this is what it looks like and what I want. So I also help my clients identify, what do you want from this? But something has to be advocated for on your behalf, because unfortunately, not all of them, but some of my clients, when they do leave, guess what? it happens in another, excuse me, it happens again in another agency. And so, you know, if you didn't advocate or learn how to advocate for yourself at the first agency and it shows up again at the second or the third job, then we're kind of back at the same conundrum. So advocacy, is a huge part of what I work on with my clients, because when it shows up again, you know how to attack it. And I have to say attack it because they're aggressive, hence microaggression, and you have to be aggressive about yourself. I can only show up with you as a therapist, but you have to be able to show up and advocate for yourself.
What are some of the tips that you have for people that are actually experiencing, and I don't know if this changes via the types of microaggression. Do you have tips for people on how to handle overt versus covert microaggressiveness?
Sure. I think one of the things that I always tell my clients is to document,
Okay.
whether it was covert or overt, document. So if it was blatantly out in the open, document that. You can put it, into an email with that person and your supervisor or their supervisor or both supervisors of the exchange and actually what happened. Because when you verbally address someone, right, or confront someone, it's always going to be he said, she said. But if I put it in the email what actually happened, then this email could possibly prompt a meeting where HR can be involved. I tell my clients, once that email or documentation trail starts, you keep track of it. And once the meeting is involved, ask somebody from HR to be there. Don't go into a meeting alone
Mm.
with the person who, insulted you and just a supervisor.
Yeah.
It's not to say that you're being paranoid or you can't trust anyone, but HR is supposed to be there to have a full story of the situation, because at the end of the day, if it was to escalate to something even bigger, you've done your due diligence and
Yeah.
having a track record. And so again, it's kind of like being a therapist. If you don't document, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree in terms of the documentation, but with the caveat that HR is not your friend.
Yeah, no. And you know what? And so when you get to that point where you are proving that HR is not your friend, then here comes the EEOC. Like there's levels to this.
Mhm.
I always pray and hope that once HR is involved, that it just stops there. But unfortunately, sometimes it just doesn't.
Yeah.
But having the paper trail, making the phone calls, and putting people like on notice, it does help. Because if it's always well, this person said this, and you have nothing to back it up as far as documentation, then it didn't happen. And you're more in a space where you could lose credibility. Now you're going to be even more open to being attacked and more villainized, and
Yeah.
people leaving nasty notes at your desk, or just all types of stuff. So it starts with documentation. And again, everybody has a supervisor. So even if HR is not willing to investigate, be a part of, and really represent you,
Mhm.
you can always go over HR.
Well said. I'm wondering if there's anything that you could recommend for people that experience microaggression in terms of how they can sort of validate themselves and humanize themselves when they know that they aren't going to get it at a place where they may spend 40 hours or how many ever hours they spend working. How can you sort of show up and self-soothe in a healthier way?
Okay. Well, one, I think it starts with the mindset in that you're not crazy, you're not being paranoid, you don't have, imposter syndrome, all these things that may come up because of what you are experiencing in the workplace. So one, it starts with the reframe. If you felt that it was an insult, it was racist, it was a microaggression, it was, because you're the one that is going through that experience. So guess what? It was. Second, I say take a day or two to process it so
Mm.
that you're able to write down again in an email and track the actual interaction, again starting that paper trail. But when you leave and you go home, whatever it is that you into that rejuvenates you, that fills you up with love, that fills your cup up, I say engage and connect with those things. That is not connected to drug and alcohol or behavioral or process addiction. So for me, when I was going through a lot, I would always connect with girlfriends that would make me laugh and cackle, and we just talk about everything but work.
Yeah.
I would make sure that I spent time with my cat, believe it or not, some pet therapy.
Yeah,
Seriously, right?
I love
To
it.
just, yeah,
Yeah.
to just sit there and cuddle with something, or your spouse or your significant other, just to just be in
Yeah.
that space of just calm and mindfulness, right? Just to be present in that moment. You don't necessarily have to, do yoga, meditate, or go to the gym, but if
Yeah.
that's something that rejuvenates you and fills your cup, go for it. But I'm more of a like a simplistic, kind of like in the moment mindfulness present type person. So again, for me, it was calling my girlfriend like, hey, how you doing today? What's going on with connecting. And just, I love laughter. And that's a huge, endorphin booster. So for me,
Yeah.
that has always been a go-to for me. Pet therapy, I have children, talking to them about their day. Did they enjoy it? Give me some good highlights from your day. So what I'm saying is finding things that are not necessarily distractions, but things that help you shift, things that allow you to be mindful and grateful for the things that you do have, because we've been there where we've often stuck in jobs that were just not a good fit. And we've had to stay in those positions until we found something better. Right. But what do we do in the between time to cope? And so you have to lean on those resources that love upon you and you love back to keep you going through those 40-hour work weeks. I say even make those phone calls on the lunch break, right?
Mm.
Because I used to do that too. I used to go in my car and I would cry some days, but then once I finished my ugly cry, I would get on the phone, I would call my husband or I would call my mom, and I would just talk to them about their day just to really again connect, reconnect, and ground myself, right? Because if you think about it, even though your job is 40 hours a week, you're bigger than your job. There's a whole life that you live outside of your job.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you just really have to take the time to reconnect with that.
I agree, but I think something happens to a lot of people, although the job is 40 hours per week. In your mind, that makes sense. But again, I think this is another aspect of the micro invalidation that happens that I think people haven't really necessarily connected the dots. But there's a phenomenon that happens in a lot of Black folks, Black women especially, where even if you're kind of experiencing those things at work, you show up and you work double and triple and quadruple as hard, and you kind of overperform, in the hopes that there will be some sort of recognition. And so although yes, it's 40 hours, but really it's 120.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Combined with all the mental stress. So
Yes.
you're really overdue what you're
Yeah.
doing to show up and be seen.
Yeah. It is a lot. And so from there, I, would challenge the Black professional woman to say, okay, how much of this is really, really about me? And how much is this really, really about my identity attached to my job?
Mm-hmm.
Because I
Mm-hmm.
get it. We definitely have to show up, and juggle like 8 lemons, donate plasma, fix computers. We have to do like so many
So
different
much.
things, right? So much just to prove who we are to
Yeah.
these persons that we're around who try their hardest to invalidate us, right? And so when you have that going on, I think you do have to pull yourself back and say, okay, this is how much I know I can dedicate and show up, not only for myself, but this job, because I,
Mm.
am an employee here. But at the same time, how much of this can I detach from? Because at the end of the day, I am not my job. That's not my only
I
identity,
agree.
right?
I
And
agree.
so a lot of times we do get so caught up in that, and just saying like, who we are is like, our title in this workspace that is killing us, right? Giving us light strokes, if you will, hypertension. And it's unfortunate because I think we love what we do. We show up, we do excellent work, but we also have to realize that some of these agencies and these companies don't value us, and that they show us in so many levels that they don't. So I want to show up and still do my job and maybe go above and beyond, but at the same time, I also have to accept and realize that I'm in that type of work environment, especially if I'm not looking to leave. Because there's some people who just don't want to leave their job, and that's fine. So again, like I said earlier, I go back to, okay, how can we make sure that you have a healthy identity to you in this workplace that's toxic, so that it just doesn't consume who you are overall as a person? Because it does start to wear and tear, and the line becomes very blurred.
Absolutely. You mentioned, you know, having people to talk to. And although you sort
Mhm.
of mentioned people to talk to about things outside of work, I want to see, I'd like to talk maybe about who can you go to when you're experiencing this. Who can you, how can you identify a safe person
How can you identify a safe
to talk
person?
to about what you're experiencing either inside or outside of the workspace? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent question. So I have had coworkers or a coworker who was experiencing what I was experiencing. So we definitely became a support for each other, right?
Hmm.
But then I'm very careful with that too, because you don't
Yes.
want it to be where you're just constantly dumping so
Yes.
much of that negativity where it's just kind of like the only basis of the conversation. So it's like a trauma bond,
Yeah.
right? Um, but they're still good to kind of have either way, but you just want to be mindful how much of that you put energy into.
Sure.
Because on the outside of that, you may have a girlfriend, a mama, aunt, or uncle, or a spouse who you can talk to, who are very on the outside, don't know your boss, don't know the work environment, who can help you shift to talk about other things that aren't necessarily work related. But when you do share your work experience, they can pour into you, make you feel good. They don't question, are you crazy? Are you sure they said that? Are you just being paranoid? I don't think that was the case, right? Um, and if you do have a coworker or someone, a significant other family member, a friend who does question that, then that probably is someone you would not want to talk to and share that work experience with.
Mm.
People who you share with, they don't question, your validity, because again, this is your experience. This is what happened to me today at 3 o'clock. And I
Mhm.
need someone to talk to, because I'm just like taken back as to what really happened. And so people are actively listening to you and again supporting you and validating it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I don't know how you feel about this, but if you have people in your life that are questioning your validity, I think that's more of the issue than the microaggression itself.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is when you're used to not being seen and heard or validated as a person, that's kind of how you show up in life. And that narrative continues to repeat itself.
yeah, yeah. Because you're right. People bring work home, and sometimes people bring home to work. You are
In all
right.
their relationships, and it just sort of extends outward where you
Yes.
just don't feel seen,
Yes.
in all aspects of life. So it might be more than just a work issue, although it's manifesting there. It
Yeah.
might actually be bigger than that.
Yeah. I've had clients who were in abusive relationships and marriages, and
Hmm.
they were kind of used to that abuse. And so when you're going to work and you get it from your boss, it's normal. And you don't even recognize that it's abuse, because you've just been in relationships that have been abusive. So it just feels normal.
What do you see in your clients' relationships that they sort of are not aware of or unaware of?
So I think the verbal insults,
Mm.
it shows up different because they are saying, okay, well, my husband said this to me and my supervisor said this to me. And when we look at both of the comments, I have to show them the commonality between the two, that it's abusive. But they don't look at it as abuse because, again, it's a supervisor who's saying, oh, they're just giving me constructive feedback and criticism.
Mm.
But it's the same type of verbal insults that your spouse has been saying to you since you've been in this abusive marriage or relationship. The
Mm.
only thing your supervisor isn't doing is putting their hands on you,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, Taking advantage of, my work hours are, 9 to 5, but I know that you're going to stay past that if I were to ask you and then threaten you?
Mm.
And when I threaten you, then you feel very anxious. You don't know what to do. You're staying up all times at night. You're checking emails past 10 p.m.,
Mm-hmm.
right? Kind
Mm-hmm.
of like the abusive spouse who's threatening to leave you, take away the financial support, right? Again, your boss threatening you, threatening to take away your livelihood with firing you your job. Same parallel, but because it looks different based on the relationship, I've had clients who can't see the parallelism, although they're the same. Like you said, I have this relationship at home and now I'm taking it to work, not knowing that I'm accepting the same type of abuse because
Mm-hmm.
I've normalized it in some sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you're speaking to is, and this kind of goes back to people always ask, why can't you leave an abusive relationship? Well, what you're speaking to is oppression is occurring at many different levels,
Yes.
right? And so it becomes almost like a normalized way of life and a way of functioning that, when you're super oppressed, you don't have the freedom to sort of sit back and say, oh, this is not healthy in a
Right.
lot of cases, right? Because you're
Yeah.
just you're getting it from all angles. It might be family of origin, it might be your family that you sort of married into, it could be your job, it could be your friendships, it could just be, years worth of conditioning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
When it's systemic like that, or when it reaches out to all these areas, this level of oppression, right, or this level of aggression, what do you think women, what are some tips that you can give women about that? Or first of all, how can they, let me go back, let me ask you, how can they recognize it and what can they do about it when it's sort of it's like the overarching theme in their
Okay.
life?
So before we even recognize it, I think we have to be in a space where we are not in denial. It's kind of like the addiction, right? Because a lot of times we can't deny that we're in an abusive relationship, and we can definitely deny we're in an abusive relationship at work.
Yeah.
So if we're in denial, I mean, it's really hard to kind of crack through that, if you're in denial. But I think if you are starting to see some parallels, kind of like what we were just talking about,
Mhm.
then from there, I think it's time to get help, right? On what are your next steps. I think as Black women, we're so used, not all of us, but majority of us are used to going at a lot alone.
Superwoman
Yes. And
syndrome.
we don't have to go at a lot alone. If we're recognizing these parallels after coming out of being in denial, right, of what's going on, then we can call on to who we need to for support to help us navigate whatever that next step is to be in a better and healthier and safer space. And so a lot of times, because we are either in denial or want to do it on our own, we remain stuck. And things tend to progress and get worse. And now our health is impacted and everything else around us, right? So I think we have to start there.
Okay. I have some non-Black listeners that listen to this show.
Okay.
And they're going to be listening to you. Yes, I hope they are listening to you, taking this in, right? But one of the questions that they may wonder about is, okay, which this is also something that happens, right? The phenomenon, you as a non-Black person might see someone being microaggressed or macroaggressed upon. What can they do?
Speak up, use their white privilege to address the person who is actually making the microaggression. And I'm glad you asked that question, because a lot of times white folk will say, like, what can I do? How can I help? And it's not always in the book. It's not always educate yourself.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's you speaking up and checking your cousin, your auntie, your uncle, and your coworker that looks like you when you know they are doing something that is racist or aggressive against someone who looks like me and you, right? And a lot of times some white folks feel like I don't want to say nothing because if I say something, then there goes, my power, right? My privilege. If I speak up and say something, right? So you have to be in a space where you're uncomfortable with what comes with saying that. When it comes with standing up and supporting and helping someone Black who is being discriminated against, who is experiencing microaggressions and racism, you have to say, okay, I'm going to speak up, and whatever comes with that, it just comes with it. But a lot of white people don't want to lose that privilege. I get it. If I had it, I wouldn't want to lose it either. But if you do want to help Black folk, brown folk, again, folks that look like me and Dr. Jones, you have to be in a space where you use your privilege. And it's not always going to be you picking up a book or clicking on a link.
Yeah,
It's just not. It's going to take actual action.
absolutely.
Now, does that mean that your action is going to stop that white person from doing it again? No. But at least that person knows that if they were to do it, that you're going to be a support and an ally
Yeah.
to that Black and brown person. They know that if they do it around you, you're going to say something, or they won't do it around you.
Yeah.
Right. So you just never know how your actions, I mean, just the smallest thing, the smallest action could help
Yeah.
a Black or brown person.
It's always good to ask a person, how can I show up and support you directly if you're unclear? I think for a lot of people that would be acceptable too, just to be seen and heard and like, ask me how you can support me. But circling back to something you said about them worrying about losing privilege, they're never going to lose privilege.
Well,
even if they were to get in trouble at the job, they still have that privilege. They can pack it up and go somewhere else.
Oh yeah, for
You know
sure.
what I
You're
mean?
right.
Like, even if it
Yeah,
was
you're
the
right.
job. So, I mean, I think, just sort of that, like, and I hear what you're saying, because I do think a lot of people identify with, I might lose how good I've got it. But here's the thing, you're never gonna, like, the conversations
No, you're
that
right.
you and I are having, they're not gonna be having. Let's just
No, you're right. You're right. Because if they get fired at, Acme Company, they can pick up and go and get another job just like that. You're totally right. So it's never lost. I guess within that setting, we can think about, back in the 50s and 60s, how white people who stood up for us were called, in lovers and things like that, right? And how certain things were quote unquote maybe stripped of them in that particular environment and setting. So that's what I'm referring to. But you're right, their privilege, I mean, it just doesn't expire.
Yeah.
And they can take it wherever they go. So, in the scheme of things, you're not, losing anything. And I just encourage, white folk, take action.
Yeah.
Take action.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. And on the other hand too, maybe I can get some flack for this, but be open to having an ally.
Ah, okay. Okay.
There's so many people, again, it's kind of like when you've been kicked so much when you're down and you don't trust anybody. And so when you have somebody that's actually kind of willing to show up for you and have that conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe just
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I think you have to be open to a white person who is extending their gratitude and who wants to help you and use their privilege and their platform, right? You have to give them at least the benefit of the doubt. And if they show up in the space that now has become, different than what you had signed on for, then guess what? You don't have to continue that relationship or partnership or whatever it is. But you're right. I think that I can speak for myself. I know several white women who have tapped out to me to say, listen,
yes,
I have this platform. How can I use my platform to help further you, right? Whether it's a podcast, buying my books, bringing me into different presentations and webinars that they are hosting. So you don't want to, not be open to that, because again, they're using their privilege and their platform to farther put you out and put you in spaces that we may never be able to even tap into. Now we can get us some spaces, but again, I think what I'm hearing is with that allyship, you can still go into spaces that we just may not have access to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And It's hard to believe, but we're at the end, Dr. Holly.
Okay, well, this has been great. This has been
It
great.
has been great. I've learned so much chatting with you. So, for people that are interested in connecting with you, they listen to all the great things you had to say. Tell us how they could find you.
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn, Dr. Holly Sawyer.
Okay.
I love to connect there. So if you are looking to connect there, please drop me a note to say that you heard my interview with Dr. Jones. Otherwise, I'll think it's a solicitation connection, right? I'm also on Instagram at Life First Therapy LLC. Again, Life First Therapy LLC. If you follow, I follow back.
Yeah.
I have a website, lifefirsttherapy.com. I'm not interactive on Facebook, although I have a business page there.
Yeah.
But yeah, people can definitely, if they want to connect, find me on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Fair enough. And do you have anything that you're working on, any sort of projects or anything that like we can support you with?
Thank you for asking. So I am, oh my gosh, I'm doing like so much, but off the top of my head, I am currently furthering my research amongst racism and discrimination when it comes to substance abuse treatment amongst white and Black persons who have substance use disorder. That was my presentation last weekend. So now I'm looking to further present it and just develop and flush it out. So I'll be posting some things on LinkedIn once that's there. But whenever I do some things, I share with the public and stuff like that. So yeah.
Love it. Well, thank you so much. We have enjoyed having you, and this has been the most enlightening conversation.
I agree. Thank you.
All right. So I hope that you enjoyed that discussion with Dr. Holly. She had a lot of thoughtful tips and suggestions to offer. Let me know what your thoughts are. If you're looking at this on YouTube, make sure you drop a comment down below. I do see those. If you're following us on social media, leave a comment there as well. And it's always nice chatting with you guys and hearing what your thoughts are and just getting down to the nitty-gritty of what goes on in the world and how we can learn from these challenges and overcome and become better. So until next time, you guys stay safe out there. Take care of yourselves and be well. Check out the sneak preview of next week's episode.
Well, a lot of people have a core wound of abandonment and really don't think of it that way. It's not conscious. It's something so much a part of them they don't even know it's there. It's just the core of who they are. But the symptoms are things like feeling a little more sensitive to rejection than the average person, feeling a low self-esteem, having a low sense of personal entitlement, like as if you don't deserve to have a better life, sort of having performance anxiety, which causes it interferes in your ability to succeed in life and achieve goals because you get anxious, when you go on a job interview or when you audition for, a part in the play, your anxiety holds you back. So the symptoms of having a core abandonment wound have to do with your ability also to form secure primary relationships, especially with someone to love. Yeah. Not everyone who has core abandonment has that problem, but you'll find among people who struggle to form those secure bonds with a primary love object, those people tend to have very, deep core abandonment wounds.